Hey, this is Paul. We're just going to go through today a quick introduction of the integration between CAA's Mobile App Analytics, MAA solution, with CAA APM version 10. So the application we're using today, it's a 4JVM Tomcat application. It uses some JMS, some struts, there are calls to a MySQL database. And interestingly, there's an iOS native front-end app that are going to be used to simulate the transactions here today or send the transactions through the system. The idea is that the front end of the application is a ticket purchasing application and the back end is a financial services application. So upon confirmation of an order for tickets, a call is made to the back end to verify sufficient funds or something like that. So the situation is that my favorite tribute band to Lady Gaga, a band called Lady Baba, is performing at the local middle school gymnasium, and I'm eager to get tickets before they sell out. So the scenario starts with purchasing tickets through the native mobile app. You can see here on these three screens. First, I bring up the selection of, do I want a concert, a conference, a festival. This is a concert. I select concert, then I select I want to sit in the best row possible, section 101. I then add it to my card, and when I press confirm, what you don't see here is I get the spinning circle of death. So for some reason, it takes an extraordinary amount of time to confirm my transaction. And at the end, I'm not even really sure if the tickets were purchased or what the situation is because I don't get a definitive confirmation that my seat has been selected and purchased. So the first step is to get into the MAA console. So what would have happened at this point is an alert would have been spawned and sent to Pete, the persona we're using for the level 1 support person. In this particular case, Pete might go directly to the version 10 ATC APM Team Center. Or in this case, we're actually going to start with the MAA console. So it brings up the MAA console, and you see some information first descriptive of the operational status of the mobile transaction. You can see here I get all of the sessions. So MAA, as you're probably familiar with, provides information on every single interaction with an instrumented application for every single user every time. So in this case, I'm looking at all of the sessions for the TixChange mobile app, the native mobile app I had been using. Very quickly you can scroll down and see that the longest one is that 56-minute one. It took an extraordinary amount of time. So this one, I can drill into that and get some additional details about what actually has gone on click by click. So sometimes we like to say that the MAA combination with MAA and APM gives you from swipe to source, that is end-to-end visibility into the transactions that are flowing through those systems. So if I drill in and I look into that session specifically, I can see all of the different kinds of transactions that were posted. And you can see here, if I go down very quickly to order confirmation, you can see an extraordinary amount of time invested just trying to confirm that order. Now, the idea here is I want to pivot and actually get the deep dive information to understand specifically why that order confirmation took so long. You can see here, if I go to a slightly different view or drill into that transaction, I get a direct link to CAA APM version 10 from within the MAA console. So simply all I have to do is click on that button for APM, and I'm cross-launched in context directly over to the CAA APM Team Center, new with version 10. So what I'm looking at here is the kind of view that a person like Pete, the level 1 support person, would be looking at. And the interesting thing is I can go from left to right and see end-to-end where the problems go. A problem, in fact, shows that the order confirmation transaction is slow on the far left. I follow it all the way through and get it all the way into this red account service method here. So that suggests to me that if I was Pete, I might want to just pass it directly to a second-level person. And the nomenclature of the APM personas, that might be a Ryan persona. In this case, I'm going to go ahead and presume that I'm the Ryan individual now. So I've received an email from Pete, the level 1 support person, and has a hot link in it that takes me directly to this view. Now, from this perspective, I see exactly what Pete did. I see that I do have an error that goes all the way down and of that account service method. Now, it so happens that Ryan's organization, they have the concept not only of getting to the root cause, but of restoring service as quickly as possible. This is similar to the ITIL ideas of incident management and problem management. In this case, we're going to decide that this is in fact a critical situation that I have to restore service as quickly as possible. As a bit of an aside here, our vision is with APM to actually have a metric, time to critical. We have yet to release it or schedule it for into a specific build of APM, but the idea is that the system ought to be smart enough to advise an individual whether this system is sufficiently critical or going to go critical so soon that you really have no choice but to do a very quick workaround, or if there's sufficient time to do a more thoughtful problem resolution and avoid the need to do a workaround and then resolve that and all that. So look forward in future versions of CAAPM, this idea of time to critical to start presenting itself. Getting back to the scenario here, in this particular case, I'll decide that this very well may be critical enough for me to have to do a workaround. Now, I'll share with you that in a number of circumstances, people aren't particularly sophisticated when they do workarounds, and probably the number one thing they do is restart JVMs. So if I'm eager to see if that will work in this situation, I can look at this view. It's not obvious to me how these map to JVMs. Can I just restart a single JVM or two and restore service? I don't have information with this view, so I actually have to look at a different view. And you can see if I actually compress this view, what I'm actually looking at is that I can just see what I'm looking at is the application for more of a tier-by-tier representation. In the upper left with the red arrow, you can see that I just simply used the compress capability in Teamcenter. So the previous view I had, this view, is just showing me kind of modularly what's going on. I've got end-user transactions talking to the front-end app, which is called Exchange, and then that banking back end as we described. But I need to generate a new perspective so I can get kind of a JVM-centric view of the world. So to do that, it's as simple as clicking on the Add button in the upper left. I'm then presented with the capability to generate either a simple perspective or a multi-level perspective. In this case, I'm going to use multi-level perspective. That's just kind of a fancy way that I'm first going to group all the components by one attribute. Having made that grouping, I'm then going to group them by a second and then finally a third. In our particular case, the ones I've chosen are the end user. So in other words, the first grouping is going to be by the specific kind of transaction that is being monitored. Having done that grouping, I'm going to say, okay, what are the hosts that are supporting those transactions? And then last, I've selected agent name. As you're probably well aware, there's a one-to-one mapping between agents and JVMs. So this is going to give me basically the JVMs that are on the hosts and the hosts that are supporting the end-user transactions. And for convenience, I just entered the name JVM view. So if I want to use this in the future, it's saved and I know what it is. So I simply click on Save. When I click on Save, I can then get this view. And in this view, I actually see those end-user transactions. I see that I have but a single host, and I've got those 4 JVMs I mentioned in the introduction to this presentation. Now you can see the regrettable thing here for me is that every one of these JVMs is showing an impact. So it wouldn't be possible for me just to restart 1 or 2. I'd actually have to restart all 4. So at this point, I might decide that I just want to do a more thoughtful problem analysis at this point. So to do that, I'm going to go back to the previous view, and I'm actually going to use the timeline feature. So you can see I've returned to the view that, in this case, Pete would have sent me. But now I've activated the timeline feature. And I can see some very interesting things. As you're probably acquainted with the timeline, I see swim lanes for status, topology, and attribute changes. And going from the bottom to the top, I can see right at about 5:05 there was an attribute change. And I'll share with you this particular attribute is a flag indicative of the release of a new version of the software into production. So then a few minutes later, in fact 1 minute later, I see a topology change. And then I see some alerts start to post in the upper swim lane. So that's interesting, right? So with the current version of the software, it's still necessary for the user to make manually the correlation to say that, you know, this attribute change is correlated with this topology change and is correlated with these, and furthermore to presume causality. So this attribute change caused the topology change, and in turn it caused these alerts start to post. It's interesting if we look at the alerts. It's easy to presume that this is the kind of the first alert, and this is a sympathetic alert that's fired in reaction to this first one being posted. So interesting cause and effect relationship. I'll share with you that in subsequent releases of APM, our vision is to actually have the software not only identify as it's doing here, but also do the correlation and presume causation on behalf of the user. That's when we really start to evolve from a purely descriptive technology to a prescriptive technology. And actually, at some level, kind of make visualizations like graphs and charts and dashboards a bit obsolete, because the system can very simply tell me in text, hey, there's been an erosion of performance on the order confirmation transaction. I have correlated it to a new release of the software being introduced, which caused the topology change, which in force caused the account service method to start running slowly, and so on and so on. So it will be a very powerful addition. But as you can see here in version 10, its industry-leading capability present this information and allow the user to very quickly correlate and find what we're calling patient zero, extending the medical analogy we have. Now, if I actually slide the bar on the right-hand side of the timeline, I can go back in time and actually see what this looked like before that topology change took place. And if I slide that back, you can very easily see, if I toggle, that what happened when I introduced that new release is that I actually introduced that new method, that account service method that's showing red. So I actually presented something similar to this to another customer of mine, and I showed them this capability, and they said, well, you're going to have a dramatic impact on my service management system. And I was like, well, how is that possible? He said, well, it's a real frustration to us that one of the #1 resolution codes we're starting to see is can't reproduce problem. And using this technology, the timeline view in version 10, I really don't have to reproduce the problem because everything is captured right here. I can see that when I added the new release, it changed the topology and it introduces a latency in the application that's unacceptable. So it's a very powerful capability that's introduced with version 10. And as we've seen earlier, it's directly linked to the mobile app analytics solution. So I can know definitively what's happening all the way at the user level and go all the way down to this level. Now, carrying it further, I could drill in here, and you can see I've opened the panel on the right, gives me some additional details. It also gives me the ability to pivot over into APM Web View, which is the expert view, if you will, of this information. As you're probably aware, kind of the cornerstone of the signature capability of CA APM, ever since its inception back in probably 15 or 20 years ago, was method-level performance information for problematic transactions. Well, the access to this is by this hyperlink here in the right-hand details panel. So all one would need to do if I was a deep dive developer, I would select this account service method, I would simply click on this link and I'd hyperlink over to the more classic expert view of the technology. I could drill in method by method, seeing a transaction trace, as we call it, starting with a mobile transaction at the top. I would see the slow order confirmation. I'd be able to drill through all the way down to the lowest level method and understand specifically what's going on. In this particular case, it might be necessary to roll this back out of production, roll back to a previous release, and actually look at what specifically has happened with this account service method. I'll share with you there's a new capability to actually move to the left of the software delivery lifecycle, if you will. So what we're doing is we actually now have a plugin for Jenkins for APM version 10. So it's possible to run APM in pre-production, and as you're running unit tests, not only will you be able to see if the unit test failed on functionality or performance, but you can also track a number of methods that give you a sense as to whether, although it might pass on functionality and performance, you may be dramatically increasing the complexity of the code and therefore positioning yourself for problems down the line when you do roll into production. That may have been the situation here, that this passed all the unit tests in pre-production, but yet it got in production and started presenting a slowness that we're seeing here today. So that concludes the overview, but hopefully you see now how there's a direct integration between CA's Mobile App Analytics, or MAA, and CA's APM version 10 solution to give end-to-end visibility into transactions that are started by the native mobile apps. Thanks a lot. Have a good day.